So now that I've given you an overview of what readers writer locks are in general, let's talk about some of the pros and cons of readers writer locks before we get into the details of how they work and the different APIs that are provided. So some of the benefits of readers writers locks is they may very well help to improve performance. If they don't improve performance, then what's the point of using them, right? And the main context under which they will improve performance is when certain resources are read much, much more often than they're written to, using the course catalog example that we just talked about as one potential example of that. This is especially true when you have multi-core platforms, modern computer processing platforms, that have a very high degree of inherent parallelism. So I think I mentioned before, my computer that I'm doing this lesson on has 8 hyper-threaded cores, so it's got 16 effective cores. That's a lot of parallelism to be running in one machine. The downside with readers writer locks is they can be a little bit tricky to use in practice. One of the problems is that they could lead to starvation. If they give preference to readers, then the writers may starve. If they give preference to writers, then the readers can starve. And that's due to the inherent unfairness. You've got to give preference to somebody. And so if you give preference in such a way where other threads, other readers or writers never get a chance to run, then they're going to eventually starve. They can be also somewhat complicated to program. And we'll take a look at this as we get into the details when we start looking at the ReentrantReadWriteLock and the StampedLock. But there are various features like lock downgrading and lock upgrading and optimistic locks and conditional write locks and so on and so forth. And these can be a little bit tricky to program if you're not well versed in the protocols and semantics of reader-writer locks, especially the APIs that are provided with Java. Another problem that they run into is they actually, in many cases, can be slower, and in some cases, significantly slower than other synchronizers. And that's due to the complexities of implementing the reader's writer protocol in software, as compared, for example, to implementing the lock and unlock semantics with things like atomic compare and swap operations, which are really typically implemented in hardware or firmware. So under some circumstances, they do very well. Under other circumstances, they do very poorly. And so you just have to be aware of the pros and cons and also be aware of doing some serious benchmarking to see what works best for you. What we're going to do now is we're going to evaluate the pros and cons of StampedLock and ReentrantReadWriteLock in more detail in the upcoming lesson.